So I guess those two together represent a very important group in this whole area of the way we use pharmaceuticals and medications in psychiatry. The recipient end, the consumer, and the prescribers, some of us who are psychiatrists and other doctors in the audience. So I'm going to ask each person to give a 2-minute individual response to the movie. But I think my main job really is to field the questions or comments from the audience, and I was really mainly concerned about that something might become a bit rabble-rousing and disturbing, and I'll place 2 anonymous security guards in the audience, Roger Bannister and Andrew Borman. And if anybody's out of control, they will quietly slip up next to you, offer you small words, soothing words, or a medication and ask you to leave. So I've introduced John Giardini and Ellie briefly. They've got a counselling background, and York Strobel is our other panellist as a psychiatrist, who is one of our leading psychiatrists in the rural and remote mental health service. So perhaps starting with John, would you like to give your initial reflections of the movie?
Sadly, I couldn't spot any inaccuracies in that film. I was hoping there might be some, but that's the way it is. I was struck by the comparison to the talk about informed consent and the comparison to vaccination for COVID, where we've got incredibly good evidence that vaccination saves lives. We've got a strong imperative to make sure that people who are making a decision about vaccination are aware of all the possible adverse events associated with it, and we give people the right to say no to vaccination. And yet when it comes to psychiatric drugs, where even the most optimistic and enthusiastic supporters of psychiatric drugs amongst us could not pretend that they have a dramatic effect on people's lives, and where even the most strong advocates for the use of psychiatric drugs can't ignore the adverse effects they have, yet very little information forms part of the consent process. And when we go to people who are under involuntary treatment in psychiatry, who are subjected to medications that, on average, are not likely to do them very much good, certainly if we compare it to the situation where a vaccination can make a dramatic effect on your survival, then what are we thinking in our treatment of people with psychiatric disorder? Why are they allowed to be treated in a reckless way that people without psychiatric disorder would never tolerate?
Thank you. I'm sitting here feeling a lot of feels, and I just want to offer solidarity to anyone in the audience who's feeling a lot of feels. Watching things like this, it's not just about Bree, Dave, Rebecca and Shamala, it's about ourselves. And normally when I speak as Ellie, Executive Director at Welland, I'm a bit removed and distanced, and I can talk collectively about people with lived experience. I feel, because this is the first time I've watched it, you're going to get a bit more Ellie-ness than standard, because this is my life. It is why Welland exists. It's why it's important that people who live this day in, day out need a voice in our system. And I just thank everyone for being here and supporting us as well. So thank you. I want to offer that. When I think about, I actually just texted my husband in the middle, who's putting our children to bed at the moment, that I miss out on tonight, and just said, this is really hard and I need to be coherent soon to be on a panel. And he doesn't know what we're watching, but he's like, I hope you're okay. And we have a bit of an understanding together through our years. We've been together 25 years, in December 15th, randomly. And he's seen me at my best and my worst. He's been there through my hospital journeys, my medication journeys. And we have this thing where, before Are You OK Day existed, we had our own thing. I think we should copyright it and get IP. get some rights to that money. But anyway, we have this thing between us where we check in and say, are you okay? Because when suicide is close, you need a language to check in. Well, he needed a language to check in with me. He's just sending me a text now. Anyway, and we have this thing where it's like, are you okay? And I say, I'm okay in the grand scheme of things because we've learnt together that I survive, that we survive together. But in the small moments, I'm not okay. So it's like, I'm not okay, but I'm okay. And so that's what I've just replied, and he's just responded in this moment saying, very helpful to my response, because that's how we come together. So when I see this, and I think about Angie's story, where she had distress that made fucking sense, and she was told she was wrong for her experience, and that she needed a chemical to help her not be human. And I know that in my own journey, people did things to me, and I lived in a family where I couldn't be honest about that. So I starved myself, and I was told I had an illness and I was wrong, and that I needed fixing and medication and hospital. And no one ever validated the harm that others had perpetrated against me. That's what I needed at those times. When you're in hospital for an eating disorder in South Australia less than 10 years ago, antipsychotics were standard. And I'm not anti-medication, but no one ever told me fully the impacts on my life forever around that, or gave me consent options. They wanted me to eat, and they know that antipsychotics, that for a lot of people, make you gain weight. No one told me that. No one was transparent about those things. I also know, sitting here, I would be dead without taking antipsychotics, because I could not eat food without them. I had to numb myself to have any morsel of food. So people live with this whole tension as well around medication. It's not all for or all against. It's really complicated. But it's also at the point this year where I've been under the care of a cardiologist, and not just because of antipsychotics, it's not that simple. I have had pregnancy complications and anorexia hurting my heart. That I've had to educate them about peer-reviewed research that talks about antipsychotics' impact on hearts, because he said antipsychotics do have zero impact on hearts. It's not my job to educate professionals about the long-term effects of medication. I'm an articulate, educated, white, privileged woman. I know that I have a voice and access that so many people don't. And that's what we need to focus on. I guess that's the power of Leland existing, and how we can bring all of those experiences and lives to this. So I sit here tonight watching this, feeling all of the feels. When things resonate, people talk about goosebumps on the arms. I've had goosebumps on my whole body, and I will continue for the next probably 48 hours and just process this. And yeah, I think to be here tonight and this opportunity to think about this is really, really important.
Yeah.
I guess what highlighted the film for me is that the things are complicated. One of speakers talking heads talked about a certain percentage medication is useful, a certain percentage is a toss-up, and a certain percentage is harmful. And in the process of prescribing or non-prescribing, there are professionals, medical professionals, there are patients, and there is the medication as part of the potential exchange. And the question is, what do people value? I went into psychiatry because I want to be useful in reducing suffering. Now, suffering and DSM is not the same. There is lots of suffering in the world which doesn't constitute mental illness. And particularly if I see, I'm not a child psychiatrist, but I see young people from 16 And I sit with them and in a compassionate way that being a teenager at this day and age is probably tougher than when I was a teenager. And there is suffering. And to foster self-compassion, to get up in the morning, get to school and so forth. But in a society where distress is increasingly pathologized and people get the easy way out to attend school, and often parents are tired of the fight and then they give in, and so avoidance becomes a pattern. And the question is then, how do these patterns that emerge out of, the easy way of dealing with distress, then do they become a problem in themselves? And so medication and the ethics of drug companies, I think that message was certainly driven home strongly. But there are other patterns of behavior which are also damaging. There are parents conspire with. A book I recommend, or you can YouTube him, Jonathan Haidt, he wrote the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, where he sort of critically analyzes how the cultural shift of being more sensitive, taking offense rather than sort of taking it in your stride, notions of microaggressions and so forth, in some way frames experiences cognitively to be more impactful and more hurtful, creating more harm. And so the increase in anxiety and depression amongst young people in particular has a lot to do with the overall cultural safeguards in which we exist. And so I think it's important, and that is the topic tonight, to be clear about where we as medical professionals get trapped into the ease of use of medications as meeting patient expectations. But I think it can also be an invitation to think in terms of a whole society trends that contribute. Why do we have obesity? Why do we have McDonald's at every corner? It's the same thing. There is an individual who chooses to behave in a certain way, and there is a collective expectation, and so the balancing between individual responsibility for behavior and these collective pressures and normalizations of whatever the habits are is something I think we need to think more deeply about.
Thank you for those three wonderful reflections. They're more than 2 minutes, but worth every word of it. Thank you, all three of you. Can I open it up to the audience? I also want to acknowledge that I think we had 20 or more people online watching who couldn't make it here tonight, and our wonderful audience for being here. So, anybody got some questions or comments? You don't have to agree with everything that's been said. I think it's really important that we have debate where it's possible. I mean, we had a one-sided, view of the world from that movie. If anybody's got an alternative view, that would be really, really interesting. If you person up the back was first, and then the second and the third here. Correct? Yep.
I'm speaking from the carer's perspective, and I'm probably going to cry because the cause is very personal for me. I like the care for my son because of mental health issue, and I know that he's on extreme amounts of medication. And he shouldn't be, and we can't get a
Okay, all right. Do you want to comment on that? I mean, it's a reflection, I guess, on what you experienced in that situation where you feel like you're not getting a response from the psychiatrist, and I think that's very disappointing for you to have that experience. Can we move on to the two other questions, I think? So, yeah, thank you.
I guess I wanted to share a comment. Firstly, thank you everyone for organising the event, speaking about your experiences and perspectives. I come from a mixed perspective of a research background in psychiatry, but prior to that, lived experience myself, and also having other people in my life who were affected by mental illness. And so, from having seen some of the bad sides of psychiatry, definitely having seen them, I want to acknowledge everything that's happened tonight, everything we've seen, and that obviously we have had some horrendous experiences, and in many cases that was almost certainly due to malpractice. That's not the right legal term as a lawyer. There was some inappropriate actions by the doctors, and you can compare very well, particularly in the US, I think, to the opioid epidemic. There was exposure to issues. I do just want to say, I think that we still need to be careful and retain that critical ethical side, even when we're hearing a less often heard voice, which is going, sort of in combat to the general psychiatric model, etc. Personally, in this movie, I did hear things that I thought were inaccurate, particularly the process of how a drug gets approved. That's, I guess, what I've studied. I'm personally writing up a manuscript right now. I promise no drug company has offered to do any of it for me. So, I just want people to be aware that they can still be misled, and there are some very emotional themes which I think were a choice, and that I think will feel emotional tonight, but that was a choice of the filmmakers in part, and I just would encourage people to try to look into as we call it, that you need to be careful as well, not to go too far in the other direction and say, it looks like they were all right, they should have stopped their meds, etc., and I should do the same, because they also cut away from me. We don't know what these people's psychiatrists and anybody in the interview and is cut so that it's not unfortunate, but what he said was really inappropriate, but it's also got to journalists.
So you're saying that some people with their diagnosis of medications might actually benefit from medications? There's two sides to the story.
And I would say, I can speak for myself personally, that I don't know if I'd be here without an antidepressant.
Okay. There's an opportunity.
Just one, I agree with you. You have to be just as critical about critical voices as you do about the mainstream voices. But there is very strong evidence to support the view that the licensing of drugs doesn't protect us from bad things happening and bad drugs being on the market.
I just want to, before I respond to that, I just want to acknowledge Anne and what you said, and that it feels like there's no right way that you can approach this as a carer or as a person who may have been taking medication, be thinking and pondering where you're at with it. So I just want to acknowledge that. And that there can be a lot of shame when we watch things like this and questioning about our own actions and what we've lived. And with what was just said as well, I do a lot of speaking around lived experience and collective and very high strategic policy at state and national level. And whenever there are conversations happening like this, where some of the darker side is talked about and the harm, there's always people trying to bring back and say, yeah, but it's not that bad and it's not for everyone. And that's important. But if we always come back to that, we never actually hear and sit with the harm that our system does. And that is the injustice that is built into our services, our systems, our policy, our practice. And we try and do power out over and shut them up again. And it's the silencing of people's lives that causes more harm and more cost lives in the end. And I know that's not what you're saying, but that's my contribution as an activist and why I'm here and why Leland exists and why it's important that we elevate these harm stories, because it is what gets squashed normally because we don't have the power. And it's not to say that that's everyone's experience, because I would never dare say that. And I said in my last response, I'd be dead without antipsychotics as well. I couldn't eat without them. But I question the consent, the informed decision making, the consequences for my life that I never had a choice around, and the transparency that was never offered to me around it. And so it's how we sit in discomfort and we reflect as practitioners, if we are practitioners. I've been a therapist, psychology, not psychiatry trained. It's our role as practitioners, clinicians, to think about our practice and our value base and the interaction and ethic that we approach this work in. And to do that in a very skilled way is to be looking at the full spectrum of what we offer the people we support. And we need to know about the harm to know about the daylight that exists within that for people as well, and that's really important. And when we are really skilled and can sit in discomfort, we understand that no option will suit everyone ever. And it's how we engage with that person in front of us at that time and hear their truth. And it may not be the actual full truth, but it's what they're presenting to us at that time. And if we are connecting human to offer them the best support, we will hear them no matter what, and not discount that, but validate their humanity and connect with them to try and help them find their solutions. And from what I hear from many people is people with lived experience aren't offered the agency that they actually have the human right to.
You're going to have another crack. Okay, you'll have a crack first.
I guess one of the challenges is, in a systemic context, what are the things that are actually rewarded for? I can prescribe to, let's say, a patient with a psychotic illness easily medication worth $1,000 per month. PBS pays, no question asked. There is no funding stream for exercise physiologists or gym membership or opera ticket for that matter, because that is good for my mental health, not that I need a refund for that. The point I want to illustrate here is that many things in terms of behaviors, activities, engagements are contributing to good mental health. And the only thing the government is willing to put money in is medication. And I finish my letters to GPs, which I always send a copy of to the patients, with sort of a standard spiel that good mental health is predicated on the development of self-compassion and self-discipline. And then I elaborate what I mean by that. And the self-discipline part is something where people also need help, and they need means to learn to meditate, to do exercise, to, whatever it is. which works for individual people, where it's a whole cluster of practices and habits people can develop for their own benefit, and not just those with the diagnosed mental illness, but for anyone. And so I think in terms of advocacy, it is a question, what do we oppose? But I think a far more important question is, what do we want to bring awareness to have a truly holistic approach?
There's one more question. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that your comparison of the sort of overzealous prescription of medication and the sort of normalisation of fast food and expanding on that, generally things that are known to sort of cause humans harm, but pushed on us by capitalist agendas despite that. Is that representative of sort of a trend in first world countries of a decreasing value of human life by governments and corporations? And if so, what is the sort of way out of that?
Yes, so what's the way out of it? We've only got 5 minutes.
I was thinking, wow, that's awesome.
I mean, it is quite simply a problem of capitalism, that we see the majority of the suffering that people like us deal with on a day-to-day basis. But the solution to capitalism, I'm not sure. We've tried one or two other things. Can I just make a point about deprescribing? Because one thing constructively that could be advocated for is for there to be some kind of state deprescribing clinic where people who are dissatisfied with the medication that they're taking could go somewhere where they'll get a sympathetic hearing from somebody who still exists within the mainstream but is prepared to take seriously a person's wish not to be taking some of the medication that they're taking. There's absolutely no reason why the state couldn't support such a clinic. It would be cost effective because you take people off expensive medications, as you're suggested. It feels to me like something that would be a good advocacy target.
Maybe we've got time for one or two more questions. Maureen, did you have your hand up? No. Someone over here? Oh, sorry, this lady just first. You'll be next, Phil.
Yeah, there was just so many aspects of that, like that just made me feel angry and want to shout and scream and say, can we do something legally to, change the system? And I think this is Ellie and some of the guys in regards to advocacy. Because I get what you're saying, John, in terms of maybe having some sort of clinic or something like that, but why can't we just bring that back into the system and not have another aspect of another, it just feels like more red tape, do you know what I mean? It just feels like another thing added into, do I go here, do I go there, and I know through my lived experience that I agree that drugs help, but I also wasn't given any indication that long-term versus short-term, any of that sort of stuff, so I think that there are multiple aspects to it, so I'd really love to hear from each of the panel members who would say there was one thing, just one thing from your perspective that could change the system, change it from your perspective. What would you say?
And you've only got 1 minute.
1 minute, I'm bad with time. No. I think right off the bat, it's not medicalising distress from the outset.
That's fantastic.
Mine as well.
Jorg, have you got another answer to that question? A 1 minute answer?
I think nutrition is underappreciated. There's a study, and she also gave a TED talk, Julie Rutledge. It's worth watching. And she did a control trial with stimulant treatment versus supplements, nutritional supplements, minerals, vitamins, adding amino acids to sort of optimize the biochemical underpinning to the development of your neurotransmitters. and the outcome after a year are very similar. With nutrition supplements, it's slower than with medication, but there is significant improvement. And the reason is that the potato and the tomato and the lettuce we eat today has not the same nutritional value as it had 100 years ago. So even if you think you have a good diet, you may be nutritionally deficient. And while
That's more than a minute, Joel.
Sorry.
I think we got the message. Phil, last question. Comment, all right, that's fine. Can you take your mask off? I can't hear you.
Deprescribing, I mean, it's a great idea, but unfortunately the funding for drugs is Commonwealth, and deprescribing is state, and we know that the state and Commonwealth is not beyond it.
All right, yes, all right, you can have the last word.
The medication my son was on, he was sleeping 1 week after the psychiatrist asked him how he was going. He said, I'm spending 1 week out to be there. The comment was, I wish I could spend 1 week.
Sorry, Chris, we're going to finish.
Let's ask,
But you can talk to John afterwards.
is there any country that does this better than...
Oh, okay, that's a good question. Is there any country that does this better than... Well, that was the United States.
The less psychiatrists you have, the better.
Botswana, maybe? I don't know. Look, and we'll thank our panel and the people that, all of the teams here that put on this meeting tonight. It was fantastic, and I really appreciate the effort that went into it.